that may be controversial. So let's welcome, give a big round of applause, Mr. Dan Gear.
Okay, the little green light's on. Can you hear me in the back? Okay, thank you. All right. The talk I'm going to give is actually a prepared talk, and I'll make it available to the organizers after this, and you're welcome to share it and so forth. It's a privilege to be here, and I mean that. If you came in my office, you'd find that and I've done this forever, I've had a sign on the wall that says, work like hell, share all you know, abide by your handshake, have fun. I actually stole that from Harold Edgerton, who invented the stroboscope. If you've seen the picture of the perfect drop of milk or the bullet going through the apple. That was on his wall, and I've adopted it. And the reason I mention that is because your invitation embodied all four of those things, and so I very much appreciate it. There's a lot to say, and some of it has the subtle characteristics that all of you know only too well. Nevertheless, I'm going to try to be crisp. I must make one small disclaimer, though, and that is, as you know, I work for Intel, and my speaking here is I'm speaking for myself and not Intel. At the same time, outreach is part of what we try to do. And we appreciate the opportunity to give back to the community here today and wherever we can. I'd be happy to discuss that one-on-one at the break or some other time, or you can connect to one of my colleagues who are milling around here today. And we have a spot outside and so forth. All that said, let me just get down to it. When I was younger, I used to say that I lived in the future. And most people who would say that are thinking of William Gibson, whose remark you probably well know, which is that the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. But I don't mean it that way, actually. What I meant was that I was staring into the fog of the future as hard as I could stare, so as to pick a path through it. Some of you will recognize a verse from 1 Corinthians chapter 13. For now, we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know even as I am also known. Which I mentioned because in the original Greek, the dark glass is a word with substantial cybersecurity import. It is enigma. I will return to this point shortly, but in the meantime, let me be clear. Cybersecurity and the future of humanity are now conjoined. Each of cybersecurity's core realities carries policy freight, but full analysis of that is a bit too subtle for this morning's short exercise. However you feel about the origins of the world, it is now our world. We are evolving it. Our intervention in evolution is just more evolution, but at a faster clock rate. Changes that depend on the favorable allotment of random perturbations take geologic time, including the time to test for side effects. Changes that are designed may have just as many unforeseen consequences, but the equilibria they punctuate are of much shorter duration. Often the duration is short enough that there's little real stability between episodes of punctuating change. By analogy, as wind strengthens at sea, waves stop getting higher and they start getting closer together. In my career, I've seen enough of these cycles of stability and surprise to find the description apt, even if the cadence is a bit arrhythmic. The most challenging security RFP, request for proposal, I ever received had exactly 3 bullets. Assess us thoroughly, tell us how we compare to our peers, extremist engineering change orders that keep us at constant risk. And despite the brevity and clarity of that, it was simply impossible to meet. Keeping at constant risk was, and I think remains, a bugaboo. The root source, of course, of risk is dependence, especially dependence on the expectation of stable system state. Dependence is not only individual but mutual. Not only am I dependent or not, but rather a continuous scale, asking whether we are dependent or not. And it is called interdependence. Interdependence is transitive, hence the risk that flows from interdependence is also transitive. If you depend on the digital world, and I depend on you, then I too am at risk from failures in the digital world. If individual dependencies were only static, they would be eventually invaluable. But we regularly and quickly add dependence to new things. And that added dependence matters because we each and severally add risk to our portfolio by way of dependence on things for which their very newness confounds risk estimation and thus risk management. Interdependence within society today is absolutely centered on the internet beyond all other dependencies except in climate. And the internet has a time rate of change 5 orders of magnitude faster than climate does. Remember, something becomes a critical infrastructure as soon as it's widely enough adopted. Adoption is the gateway drug to criticality. One thing we see here is that there's a kind of oscillation going on. 30 years back, you would take your data to where the computing was. University Central Computing Facility, perhaps. Then inventions made it possible to move the computing to where the data was. And every worker came to have something on their desk with which to do that processing. Then came the twin innovations of virtualization and software-defined networks. So the distal end of the connection is once again merely a display tool, while the data has again gone to where the computing is, only now we're not so sure where it is. The next oscillation has already begun, but it, like the future, is unevenly distributed. Computing is going back to where the data resides, in the sensor fabric, per se. At each stage of an evolution, the best X ever produced is also the last X ever produced, when it is itself rendered irrelevant by the leading edge of the next phase. Unless we have become as gods, some mix of the unexpected and our adaptations to it will be that of which the future is made. Every invention we make proves either non-viable, which is to say, a non-functional mutation within our human design ecosystem, or viable, which is to say, it seizes an hitherto unoccupied niche, either by creating that niche or stealing it from whoever occupies it now. Whether creating or stealing a niche does not matter, since over time the number of niches increases, at least until there is a catharsis, which in the original Greek meant cleansing or purification. The important thing to realize from a biological analogy is that to the biome, to the occupier of a niche that was here yesterday and will be gone tomorrow, extinction is a surprise. No tree can say, time to leave uphill. No salamander can say, I need to mutate. The evolutionary change depends on this unpredictability. Otherwise, yesterday's winners are tomorrow's winners. Yesterday's dominant species only get more dominant tomorrow. This is true both for nature as wetware and nature as software. I trust that some of you have read Nassim Taleb's work, such as The Black Swan, for which if not the, central point is that as the tails of the distribution get fatter, the average, the mean, the predictable becomes a function of the distribution's extreme values, and all the rest of the distribution is so much wind addressing. A fat-tailed setting inherently resists prediction, but for that very reason makes prediction ever more compelling to pursue. Taleb synopsizes the present technosocial phenomenon and momentum as follows. We are undergoing a switch between continuous low-grade volatility to a process moving by jumps with less and less variation outside of those jumps. Note that I am not conjuring up nation-state actors or divine intervention, though I personally believe that both are at work and at all times. What I am suggesting is that change is about, that change is rarely steady, but rather tends to be abrupt, that change is event-driven, that the amount of change an event engenders is proportional to the surprise with which that event arrives, and that we cannot make this otherwise. Our preaching on this topic wastes airtime. The more we say, it is coming, for some cybersecurity value of it, the more those who live only in the moment will have good and marketable reason to ignore us. Speaking as a person with some training in probability, the point to remember is that probabilistic events occur eventually. If we look at nature in the form of the equations of ecology, we see two alternative games for survival: R selection and K selection. R-selected species produce many offspring, each of whom has a relatively low probability of surviving to adulthood, while K-selected species are strong competitors in crowded environments. K-selected species invest more heavily in many fewer offspring, each of whom has a relatively high probability of surviving to adulthood. If we change the term from produce many offspring to re-image frequently, you now have precisely the world of VMs, or to be more current still, the kind of container components in a DevOps setting where it is arguable whether moving target defense or minimizing new product introduction latency is the actual paramount goal. This idea of punctuated equilibrium, as perhaps you can tell, as a hold on me. I trace the birth of the cybersecurity industry to Microsoft's introduction of a TCP/IP stack as a freebie in Windows 95, thereby taking an operating system designed for a single owner operator on at most a private net and then connecting it to a world where every sociopath is your next door neighbor. That event was the birth of our industry, though the fact was unknown at the time. The second of these moments occurred somewhere around, to the best of my guess, in 2006, when our principal opponents changed over from adventurers and braggers to professionals. From then on, mercenaries, some armed with 0 days, have dominated. The defense response has been varied, but the rise of bug bounty programs and software analysis companies are the two most obvious. An Internet of Things with a compound annual growth rate of at least 35% will be more like anabolic steroids than anything for at least those two. 2 Augusts ago, we passed a third such moment. The DARPA Cyber Grand Challenge showed that vulnerability finding and fixing, which is heretofore required human experts, may shortly come within the ken of fully automatic programs, or shall we say, algorithms that are today at the upper level of skill with some sort of intelligence soon to follow. As with both of the previous 2 turning points, the effects will reverberate for the indefinite future. I've long argued that all security technologies are dual use. And the day after the Cyber Grand Challenge, Mike Walker, the DARPA program manager in charge of it, said as much on camera. I cannot change the reality that all security tools are dual use. Those who wrote, whenever any form of government becomes destructive, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, as in the Declaration of Independence, also wrote, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's in the Second Amendment. And they wrote both at a time when the weapons of the yeoman farmer were on par with the weapons of the infantryman. In the intervening centuries, weapons of infantry have so far surpassed those of the yeoman that any right of the people to abolish destructive government could not rely on weapons kept at home. but relative might between state and non-state is today closer than it has been at any time since 1791. This oscillation in the balance of power may be peaking, but never before could a dozen guys and gals in their pajamas meaningfully annul the state's use of force. Just as hunters must lead their target, we must lead ours. Much of the time, however, we have first to argue about what our target actually is in what is obviously a target-rich environment. Let me step back just a moment before contributing to that argument. First, what is security? My definition, which underlies, or should I perhaps say bias analysis today, is that a state of security is the absence of unmitigatable surprise. Let me repeat that. A state of security is the absence of unmitigatable surprise. A state of security is not the absence of surprise. It is the absence of unmitigatable surprise. In other words, we will and should expect to fail from time to time. The second one, coming from the first, is that the highest goal of security engineering is no silent failure. Not no failure, but no silent failure. You cannot mitigate something that you are not aware exists. All well and good. As you nonetheless know indirectly in your case, our hardest problem is not that of deploying mitigations, but rather deciding how to spend our inherently limited deployment capacity. What mitigations do we actually deploy? Which malware do we counter? What vulnerabilities do we patch? What alarms do we chase down and investigate fully? You know this as well as I do. The true task of the security worker is to pick what to do based on an informed sense or intuition of which task selects for the better future. There's always too much to do. There's always a top-down demand for perfection. At this point, I can start making predictions about the future, but I'm not going to. They might be right, they might be wrong, but unless we, or perhaps the organizers, want to start putting real money on the table, those predictions would be worth what you paid for. Instead, for the purpose of this talk, I'm going to describe some choices we have to make. Choices that we will make, one way or the other. These are choices we have to make not in the sense of what will I have for breakfast, but rather in the sense of coming to a fork in the road and picking one of the turnings, realizing full well that we will never come back to that fork as unencumbered as we are now. Metrics. Much has been written on security metrics, but we are still short on what constitutes the minimum essential set for cybersecurity. Charles Darwin said, all observation must be for or against some view if it is to be of any service. At the macro level, the fork in the road we face is which of cybersecurity's two possible goals our metrics or our observations are to be for or against. Is it driving the mean time between failures to infinity? Or is it driving the mean time to repair to zero? Both can be said to achieve the same goal, 100% availability. But which do we steer by? And by the way, don't say both. Embedded systems. You can call this the Internet of Things if you prefer. Qualcomm's Swarm Lab at Berkeley predicts 1,000 radios per human by 2025. Pete Diamandis of the X Prize fame wrote a book called Abundance. He calls for 45 trillion network sensors by 2035. These kinds of scale cannot be supervised. They can only be deployed and left to free run. If any of the free money is self-modifying, the concept of measurable attack surface is just plain over. So too is the concept of trustworthy computing, at least as we presently understand it. But to make clear the fork in the road, Embedded systems must either have a remote management interface or they must have a finite lifetime. A remote management interface delivers serious risk to us almost as much as it delivers us from serious risk. Enforcing a finite lifetime, by contrast, means culpability for those who fail to implement it. But that means culpability for whom, and how, and for what. Either way, immortal and unfixable is anathema. Defense. As mentioned earlier, the automated discovery of vulnerabilities is a classic dual-use technology. Our choice, our fork in the road, is either to move toward proving that a body of code implements its spec and no more, or to embrace moving target defense. Code proving is if not the gold standard, but it is also difficult and expensive enough to do that after a successful proof is in hand, you must then adopt brutal change control to protect your investment. Moving target defense may be good enough to reverse the defender-attacker strategic asymmetry that today favors attackers, but it also guarantees that exactly how any fielded instance of code really works at any given moment will require an intermediary to explain. Taking either path is a serious choice supported by serious results obtained by serious scientists. It is also a choice that is hard to later rescind. Composability. 3 years ago, my colleagues at a leading software security assessment firm said that the sizes of applications they were seeing had grown so large, we're talking 20 gigabyte web apps, for example, that they had to be machine-written code. So they were able to say that, therefore, that even machines can write bones. Today, they say that the average code blob is very small, consistent with the trend to microservices. This is, in fact, more of the same, but now we throw in small modules that might each be provably correct and ask whether security can be made to be composable. Can we find a way to ensure that connecting two secure modules delivers a secure result? Probably not. But DARPA program manager Sergei Bratis is formulating an effort to see if parsing, at least, can be made composable. Until the composability question is answered, the choice of module size and interconnection strategy presents fork after fork after fork from which we have to choose. To fix or not fix. In 2014, in Atlantic Monthly, Bruce Schneier asked a cogent, entirely first principles question. Are vulnerabilities in software sparse or dense? Treating that as a policy question. If they are sparse, then every one you find and fix meaningfully lowers the number of avenues of attack that are extant. If they are dense, then finding and fixing one more is essentially irrelevant and a waste of the treasure spent finding it. 6 take away 1 is a 15% improvement. 6,000 take away 1 has no detectable value. My policy answer is that for any body of stable code under competent leadership, vulnerabilities become sparse over time. But as code volume explodes, the total number of extant vulnerabilities must rise, which leads again to Nassim Taleb and the heavy tales of power law distributions and the black swan. The ongoing work by various researchers on the rediscovery rate of vulnerabilities is most instructive in this regard. In any case, this is another fork in the road. Defense by hardening versus defense by moving target. To quote Cassius Clay or Muhammad Ali, you should prefer dance like a butterfly or sting like a bee. Support. In the real world, abandon things that matter, car, house, baby, bank account. They'll get seized for the public good. Abandoned code bases should be no different. and abandoned code seized for the public good almost surely means open sourcing it. This fork in the road is actually a Hobson's choice, a take it or leave it proposition. Note that in the sense used here, code means not just source, but the build environment. Reproducibility is the issue. Reproducibility is the requirement. Tell that to your average router maker. But if seizing an abandoned code base is too big a stretch before breakfast, then start with a certifying authority that goes bankrupt. Who gets the keys? Machine learning. Algorithms that are self-modifying are either blindly trusted or they must be interrogatable, by which I mean that you must be able to get an understandable, coherent, checkable answer to the question, hey, algorithm, why did you just do that? Yet as data volumes grow, algorithm efficiency becomes more crucial. But the more efficient the algorithm, the less interrogatable it is. This was the exact theme of a workshop held by Morgan Stanley and the Santa Fe Institute in October of 2014, entitled Are Optimality and Efficiency the Enemies of Robustness and Resilience? For what it is worth, every speaker said yes. If we choose the blind trust fork, then that is what we do. We blindly trust. Thereby setting in place the precondition of a silent failure. If we choose the fork that requires interrogatability, then we have in front of us today a research-grade problem to solve before there's any more deployment. And we give up optimality and efficiency for robustness and resilience because we have to. This fork presents itself anew every single day to put something into production. Who and where? A public safety argument mandated that we geocode all cellular devices in real time. Do we use a public safety argument to mandate geocoding the internet? If so, we have a change in the dynamic of both attack and service provision, in addition to a new duty for ISPs. Of course, if cellular endpoints come to overwhelmingly dominate the client-side internet, which now seems likely soon to be true, parts of this question may become largely moot. Nevertheless, since 1684, Westphalian states have had a monopoly on the legitimate use of force within their territory. For that to have continuing relevance, cyberspace must be balkanized, and each state must amass the means to project cyber force. Yet, as we know, with enough interconnections, physical boundaries and cyber boundaries lose all correlation. So states increasingly define cyber territory by where their subjects electronically go, whether by destination control in the Chinese style or data control in the EU style. And so appears a second impetus to geocode the internet, the merger of national security with domestic tranquility. Prioritization. Amongst the classic triad of confidentiality, integrity, and availability, we have heretofore prioritized confidentiality, especially in the military sector. That will not be the case going forward. In the civilian sector, integrity will supplant confidentiality as the highest goal of cybersecurity, if for no other reason than a growing dependence on data-driven algorithms. Confidentiality may not even be in position number 2. That may turn to be availability. What we get to choose at this fork in the road is a body of procedural niceties as to when the need for integrity trumps the need for confidentiality, which is, of course, where anonymity and provenance have their long-delayed head-on collision. This, in turn, leads to data mitigation. We have to soon choose what we want to happen when stolen data is, for example, not just exposed, but also put on a blockchain from which it cannot be erased. Put differently, assured data deletion is far harder than permanent data retention. Yet many civilized goals, including but hardly limited to the right to be forgotten, require the sealing of records or their outright destruction. Which do we give up? The slick usefulness of immutability, or information crime becoming unmitigatable? What does consent of the government mean when a technology can and does trump a court order? Might we say that the fork in the road is whether a technology that trumps a court order makes us choose between variants of libertarianism, or is it a characteristic of what technology must be found to be inherently unlawful? What is to be done when contraband information appears in an otherwise innocent blockchain? If an algorithm is in charge of something we care about, what is to be done if the data from which that algorithm was derived becomes suspect or even is made to disappear? Names and reachability. The fraction of the world's endpoints that have names is falling. If you combine an estimated 3 billion endpoint addresses that is locally reachable and a global routing table that contains 750,000 entries, then a routing table entry represents, on average, approximately 4,000 potential endpoints, or in CID terms, a /20. Notably, many of the smallest routing table entries are network entries, network address translation gateways, and so might represent a vast population of other endpoints. In the sparseness of IPv6, a named endpoint is discoverable and hence reachable, whereas an unnamed endpoint is not. Are the nameless to be constrained to initiate outbound transactions but never to accept inbound ones? What is a key management model for 1 trillion small devices that have no resolvable name? In the name of security, do we require nameless, outbound-only entities to ask for an occasional update, and if so, only from entities that do have names? Momentum says that soon, the majority of internet endpoints will not be describable by name, nor discoverable by scan. Another layer of compression will, of course, solve some of those problems and create others. Provenance and forensics are going to be all but surely deeply effective. So what really is the meaning of taking the fork that leads to namelessness? More to the point, do we dare take it if we can't answer that question? Analog. The most telling fork in the road of them all is whether we retain the ability to operate our world, or at least the parts we would call critical, by analog means. Analog means, and only analog means, do not share a common mode failure with the digital world. But to preserve analog means requires that they be used, not left to gather dust on some societal shelf in the hope that when they are truly needed, they will work. This requires a base load, a body of use and users that keep the analog working. There's a genuinely substantial debate going on now in Sweden over whether cashlessness and exactly what regulatory mechanism for keeping a base load of cash processing in place is societally necessary. As the difference between Sweden and Puerto Rico shows, being cashless by design and being cashless by accident is equivalent. Senator Angus King's Senate Bill 79 is pending. It will require that the electric grid be operable by analog means. Frankly, it needs your support. But entirely uniquely, keeping the analog working is also a civil rights issue. What we have here is an historic anomaly, an anomaly where the most readily available counter to an otherwise inexorable drift into a vortex of interdependent singleton technology and preservation of a spectrum of non-trivial civil rights is one and the same encounter. The guarantee by force of law where necessary that those who choose to not participate in the digital melange can nevertheless fully enjoy life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to opt out of the digital vortex does not require that they live in medieval conditions. And by doing so, we reap a national security benefit in the bargain, as those opting out are the base load for the analog alternative. This is a fork in the road worthy of Robert Frost. I shall be telling this with a sigh, for ages and ages hence, two roads diverged into a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. And that has made all the difference. And that is what I'm here to tell you, that the future of humanity and cybersecurity are conjoined, so that as we prepare to make some decisions that are of the fork in the road caliber, we need to think it through, because in making decisions about cybersecurity, we are in fact choosing amongst possible futures for humanity. Those decisions will be expensive to later reverse in either dollars or clock ticks. The onrushing world of full personalization means the rational decision for the individual or the small entity does not and will not aggregate into the rational decision for society at large. Perhaps that is the core effect of a rate of change up with which we cannot keep. Perhaps this is not just the wisdom of Robert Frost, but also that of Donald Knuth. Premature optimization is the root of all evil. Perhaps it is Michael Dell. Left to themselves, creative engineers will deliver the most complicated system they think they can debug. Or is it Secretary of State John Foster Dulles? The measure of success is not whether you have a tough problem to deal with, but whether it is the same problem you had last year. Or maybe it is David Wheeler. All problems in computer science can be solved with another layer of indirection, except for the problem of too many layers of indirection, which immediately invokes Camille Paglia. The sweeping appeal to history somehow overlooks history's far darker lessons about the cyclic rise and fall of civilizations, which, as they become more complex and interconnected, also become more vulnerable to collapse. The earth is littered with the ruins of empires that believed they were eternal. You, we, us, are the masters of the universe now. What will we do with that power, which we have for a short while more? There's never enough time.